The first mistake was ignoring the warnings. Alex adjusted the straps on his backpack, exhaling a breath that formed a ghostly mist in the crisp mountain air. The group had been planning this hiking expedition for months. 6 experienced hikers, pushing their limits in the uncharted wilderness of the Black Hollow Range. Remote, untouched, and surrounded by legends. Guys, we're seriously doing this? Claire asked, her voice edged with excitement and hesitation. Ethan grinned, tightening the laces on his boots. Come on, Claire. We didn't drive 6 hours into the middle of nowhere just to turn around because of some local ghost stories. Ryan, the most adventurous of the group, rolled his shoulders. Besides, the old legends are just that, stories. People exaggerate. We'll be fine. Mark checked his GPS and map, nodding in agreement. We stick to the plan. The trail should take us up through the valley, across Black Hollow Ridge, and down into the basin. 4 days in, 3 days out. Sophia, the quietest of the group, glanced at the dense forest ahead, chewing her lip. Still, it's weird that the ranger wouldn't give us a straight answer when we asked about other hikers. She was right. The park ranger at the last outpost had been strangely evasive when they asked about others who had taken this route. Most don't go that deep, he had said, his face shadowed under his wide-brimmed hat. The fog's thick this time of year. People get turned around. It wasn't much of a warning, and yet it lingered in Alex's mind as they set out. The first day was stunning. The sun shone through towering pines, casting golden streaks across the mossy ground. Birds chirped. A cool breeze carried the scent of damp earth and pine needles. Hours passed in easy conversation and laughter as they ascended into the wilderness. As the sun began to sink behind the ridgeline, they reached a clearing near a small lake, perfect for their first campsite. Ryan and Mark gathered firewood while Sophia prepared the food. Alex and Claire set up the tents. By nightfall, they sat around the crackling fire, eating dehydrated meals and watching the stars emerge. It should have been peaceful, but then the sound started. A low hum, barely audible, like wind through a hollow bone. It pulsed through the air, vibrating in Alex's chest. Claire frowned. You guys hear that? Ryan laughed, poking at the fire. Probably just the wind through the valley. Mark, however, was frowning at the tree line. No wind right now, he muttered. The sound continued, rising and falling in an unnatural rhythm. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. Too much silence. The kind where even the insects and night birds refused to make a sound. Sophia shivered. Let's just get some sleep. They agreed, retreating to their tents. But Alex couldn't sleep. He lay in his sleeping bag, listening. The silence stretched on, thick and unnatural. Then, soft footsteps outside the tent, not from their camp. Slow, deliberate. Something was out there, He held his breath as the shadows passed against the tent wall, distorted by the fire's dying embers. The shape was wrong. Too tall, too thin, and when it moved, it didn't shift like a person. It just glided. Then, just before it disappeared into the trees, he swore he heard something. A whisper. His own name. Morning came slow and cold. Alex had barely slept. The whispering, the shadow outside his tent. Had it been a dream? The logical part of his brain wanted to believe that, but something in his gut told him otherwise. He emerged from his tent to find the others already up. Mark was boiling water over the fire, and Sophia sat cross-legged near the lake, staring into the mist curling across the water's surface. The fog was thicker than before. Ryan stretched, yawning. Man, that was the best sleep I've had in a while, Ethan scoffed. Of course, you could sleep through the apocalypse. Alex hesitated. Anyone hear anything last night? Sophia turned. Like what? Footsteps, Alex said carefully. And a whisper. Claire, who had been tying her boots, froze mid-motion. You heard it too? She asked. A chill ran through Alex. You heard something? Claire nodded slowly. I thought I was dreaming, but it sounded like my name. Really faint. Mark stirred the boiling water, frowning. Okay, you guys are creeping me out. Could have been the wind, right? Sophia stood and dusted herself off. We're in the middle of nowhere. No other hikers around. It's probably just our minds playing tricks. Alex wanted to believe that, but when they packed up and resumed their hike, the uneasy feeling never left him. The trail led them deeper into the wilderness. The forest grew denser, the trees taller, their gnarled roots twisting over the ground like grasping fingers. The fog clung to the undergrowth, creeping between the trunks like living tendrils. By midday, they stumbled upon something unexpected. A campsite. But not just any campsite. It looked abandoned. A fire pit surrounded by logs. A tent collapsed and half covered in leaves. A backpack leaning against a tree, its straps frayed. Ryan whistled. Looks like someone left in a hurry. Mark approached the tent cautiously. Maybe they got lost. Ethan checked the backpack. It was weathered, the fabric discolored and stiff. He unzipped it, rummaging through. Clothes, a journal. No food. Alex stepped closer, his stomach tightening. The air here felt heavier, like they had stepped into a different time. Claire pointed at something near the fire pit. Footprints, but they weren't normal. They started at the fire, but there were no leading tracks, like someone had just appeared. And the worst part, there were no footprints leading away. Sophia exhaled sharply. Let's keep moving. No one argued. As they walked on, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching them. And as they disappeared into the mist, the abandoned campsite remained behind, silent, undisturbed, as if it had been waiting for them. The forest closed in around them. What had started as a crisp, clear morning had become a suffocating gray void. The fog thickened as they hiked deeper, swallowing the trees, dampening all sound. At first, they dismissed it. Just morning mist, Ryan said, adjusting his pack. Happens in the mountains. But as the hours passed, the mist refused to lift. If anything, it grew denser. It wasn't normal. It coiled around their legs, swirling unnaturally when they moved. The farther they walked, the less they could see. Soon, even the trees just a few feet away became dark, looming shadows. Alex checked his GPS. The signal flickered, then cut out. He frowned. "Hey, Mark, check the map. How much farther until we reach the ridge?" Mark unfolded the map, but his expression darkened. "We should have reached it by now." A tense silence fell over the group. "Maybe we got turned around," Claire suggested. Ethan shook his head. "We've been following the same direction. That's not possible." And yet, the landscape had started to feel wrong. The trees, weren't they passing the same twisted oak over and over? The ground, why did it seem like their footprints kept disappearing? Then came the first whisper, soft, indistinct. Alex froze mid-step. "Did you hear that?" The others stopped. Sophia turned her head slowly, her face pale. "I thought it was just the wind, but it almost sounded like..." A distant laugh echoed through the fog. It wasn't human, low, breathy, twisting through the mist like something hiding just out of sight. Ryan grabbed his knife. "Okay. Nope. What the hell was that?" No one answered, because the fog was moving, not drifting like normal mist, but shifting, curling around them like living hands. Then, a shadow. It flickered between the trees, taller than a man, impossibly thin. It didn't move like a person. It slid between the trees, vanishing in the mist. Claire sucked in a breath. Someone's out there. Alex's heart pounded. "We need to keep moving, now." They started forward, faster now, their boots scrunching against damp leaves. The whispering followed. Shapes flickered just beyond sight. And then, a scream. Not one of theirs, but close. Too close. It was Sophia who saw it first. She gasped, pointing ahead. "Guys, the ground." They all stopped dead. There, just a few feet ahead. Their own footprints, leading right back toward them. They had been walking in a circle. Panic rose in Alex's chest. "That's not possible." Ethan's face was pale. "We've been walking in a straight line." Claire turned in place, her breathing ragged. "No, we're being led." A cold realization settled over them. They weren't lost. Something was keeping them here. Then, from deep in the mist, the whispering changed. The words became clear, low, hollow. "You can't leave." And this time, It wasn't distant. It was right behind them. The whisper came from right behind them. Alex spun around, his breath hitching. The fog churned, swirling in thick tendrils. But there was nothing there. Not a person, not an animal. Just shifting gray mist, as if something had been standing there only moments before. Then, Sophia screamed. Alex turned just in time to see her drop to her knees, hands pressed to her ears. Her eyes were wide with terror, locked onto something deep within the fog. Claire grabbed her shoulders. "Sophia, what is it?" Sophia's body trembled violently. She didn't respond, didn't even seem to hear them. 1 second, she was on the ground. The next, she was sprinting into the mist, vanishing in seconds. Alex lunged after her. "Sophia!" But the fog swallowed her whole. The group stood frozen, their breathing ragged. Ethan's voice cracked. "What the hell just happened?" Ryan cursed under his breath. "She just ran, like she saw something we didn't." Mark unslung his backpack, pulling out his flashlight. "We have to find her." They fanned out, calling her name. But the sound felt muted, absorbed into the thick air. Alex's heartbeat thundered in his ears. Hadn't seen what Sophia saw. But something had been there. Something had made her run. They searched for nearly an hour. The deeper they went, the worse the fog became. It clung to their clothes, damp and cold, muffling every sound. Alex's throat was raw from yelling. "Sophia!" No response. Then, Claire gasped. "Oh my God." They all turned to see what she was pointing at. Sophia's backpack. It was sitting in the middle of a clearing, perfectly placed. Alex's stomach nodded. She wouldn't have just left that. Ryan stepped forward cautiously. Maybe she dropped it when she ran, but as he reached down, his fingers froze just before touching the fabric, because something was wrong. The backpack wasn't just left behind. It was rotting. The fabric was discolored, the zippers rusted, the straps frayed. It looked like it had been sitting here for decades, but that wasn't possible. Ethan took a shaky step back. That's not right." Claire's breath came out in short gasps. "What if..." She swallowed hard. "What if we're not the first ones this has happened to?" The idea sent a fresh wave of fear through them. Sophia was gone, and the only trace of her left behind was something impossibly old. Then, from somewhere deep in the fog, a single sharp laugh. Not Sophia's, something else's, and it was close. The laughter faded into the mist, leaving only silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Mark broke the stillness. "We need to keep looking." His voice was firm, but there was an edge of fear behind it. He picked up Sophia's rotting backpack, holding it as if it would crumble in his hands. "This doesn't make sense," Ethan muttered. "That bag, it's not possible." Alex swallowed hard. Maybe it's just the damp air making it decay faster. But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. None of them did. They moved forward carefully, calling Sophia's name. But the fog was unnatural. It absorbed sound, warping it. At times, their voices echoed back, twisted, distorted. And then, Alex, a whisper, right beside him. He turned sharply, heart hammering. No one was there, but he could still feel it. A presence, cold and watching. Claire's voice shook. This place isn't normal. Ryan was gripping his knife so tightly his knuckles were white. No kidding. Mark turned to Alex. We should split up, cover more ground. Alex hesitated. Every horror movie instinct in his body screamed bad idea. But Sophia was out there, alone. Fine, he said reluctantly. But we don't go too far. If anyone hears or sees anything, yell. We meet back here in 10 minutes. No one liked the plan, but they agreed. And then they split up. Alex moved carefully, scanning the trees. The silence was suffocating. His breath was the only sound, slow, controlled. His boots crunched softly against the damp forest floor. Then, a figure standing just ahead in the mist. Sophia, he called. She didn't move. Alex took a slow step forward. Hey, it's me. Are you hurt? Still, no response. The fog shifted, revealing more of the figure. Alex's stomach dropped. It looked like Sophia, but her back was turned, and something was wrong. Her posture was too stiff. Her arms hung limply at her sides. Her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Sophia. No response. Alex stepped closer, his pulse pounding. Then she moved. Not a step, not a turn, just a slow, unnatural jerk, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. Alex's breath caught, and then she spoke, but her mouth never moved. Alex, the voice came from behind him, right behind him. Alex spun, but there was nothing. And when he turned back, Sophia was gone. Alex stood frozen, his breath shallow. Sophia had been there. He had seen her, but now she was gone. The whisper still echoed in his ears, not from her lips, from behind him. A chill settled in his spine. Then, far off in the mist, a voice. Alex, his stomach clenched. It was Sophia's voice. But after what he had just seen, a sick feeling twisted in his gut. Still, he had no choice. He ran toward the sound. The others were already there when he arrived. Sophia stood in the clearing, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked shaken, but unharmed. Claire had her hands on Sophia's shoulders. Oh my God, you're okay. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Jesus, what happened? Sophia's voice was small. I don't know. I just started running, and then everything got confusing. I heard voices, but I couldn't tell where they were coming from. Ryan narrowed his eyes. You just ran off, just like that. Sophia hesitated. I thought I saw something. Alex clenched his jaw. What did you see? Sophia's hands trembled. A man, tall, in the fog. He was just standing there. And then she shook her head. I don't remember. The group fell silent. Something wasn't right. Alex had seen her. But the way she moved, the way she vanished, was this really Sophia? Or something that just looked like her? Claire squeezed her hand. We're just glad you're okay. Sophia gave a small, tired smile. Yeah, me too. Alex wanted to believe it, but when she turned her head slightly, just enough for the firelight to catch her face, his stomach dropped. Her eyes, for a split second, too fast for anyone else to notice. They weren't Sophia's eyes. They were black, empty, and looking straight at him. Night fell over the forest. The group sat huddled around a weak fire, their faces hollow with exhaustion. The fog still lingered, thick and unmoving, pressing against them like an unseen force. Sophia sat close to Claire, arms wrapped around her knees. She hadn't spoken much since they found her. Alex kept stealing glances at her. Something was off. The way she moved, the way she sat, too still, too calm for someone who had been missing for hours. And her eyes, that split-second glimpse of black, empty voids. Had he imagined it? Or had he seen something he wasn't supposed to? The fire crackled, casting shifting shadows against the trees. Mark passed around a protein bar. We need to figure out our next move. Ethan nodded. We can't just keep walking in circles. Maybe if we head toward the higher ground, we can get a signal. Ryan muttered, if this fog even lets us. Sophia didn't react, didn't blink. Alex watched her closely. Sophia, do you remember anything at all? Where you were? She turned slowly. I told you. I got lost. A chill crept up Alex's spine. Her voice was wrong. Not entirely, but off by a fraction. Like someone trying to sound like Sophia, but just slightly failing. Claire nudged her. You must be exhausted. Sophia's lips curled into a small, slow smile. Yeah, exhausted. But her eyes weren't tired. They were alert, studying them. Ryan tossed a stick into the fire. We should sleep in shifts. The group nodded. Mark, Ethan, and Claire lay down first, while Ryan kept watch. Alex hesitated, then lay back. But he didn't close his eyes. Instead, he kept them locked on Sophia. And then, she moved. Not a normal shift in position. A sharp, twitching jerk, like a puppet with its strings pulled. Alex's breath caught. Sophia slowly turned her head, and in the firelight, she smiled at him. Not a normal smile. Too wide, too wrong. Then, without a word, she lay back down. Alex stayed awake the whole night, because deep in his gut, he knew that was not Sophia. The fire burned low, its embers pulsing weakly in the dark. Alex hadn't slept. He kept his eyes on Sophia, heart pounding with every unnatural movement she made. She lay still, her breathing slow and deliberate. Too deliberate, like she was mimicking sleep. Ryan sat a few feet away, rubbing his hands together for warmth. His knife rested beside him, just within reach. "You good?" he murmured. Alex nodded, not taking his eyes off Sophia. "Yeah." Ryan followed his gaze. "She's back, man. She's fine." Alex swallowed. "Is she?" But before he could say anything, a twig snapped. Both of them stiffened. Alex sat up slowly. Ryan gripped his knife. The sound had come from the trees. Not close, but not far. The fog remained, thick, curling at the edges of the firelight. The trees stood in eerie silence, black silhouettes against the mist. Then, another snap. A slow, steady movement. Footsteps. Not random ones. Something was approaching. Ryan's knuckles whitened around, his knife handle. "You hear that?" Alex nodded. They weren't alone. Mark stirred, rubbing his eyes. "What's going on?" Alex held up a hand for silence. The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, there was only the crackling of the fire. Then, a whisper, low, breathless, from the trees. "Let me in." Alex's blood turned to ice. Ryan shot him a look. "What the hell?" Mark sat up fully, now wide awake. "Who was that?" Another whisper. Closer this time. "Let me in," Claire whimpered in her sleep. And then Sophia sat up. Fast. Too fast. Alex's heart nearly stopped. She turned her head toward the trees, her face expressionless. Then she whispered back, "Not yet." Ryan scrambled to his feet. "Who the hell are you talking to?" Sophia turned her head toward him slowly. For a moment, she just stared. Then she smiled. "Go to sleep, Ryan," she said softly. Ryan took a step back. "Yeah. No. I think I'm good." Sophia's smile didn't fade, but her eyes darkened. The whispering stopped. The forest fell completely silent. Then, Sophia lay back down, like nothing had happened. Alex didn't move. Ryan didn't move. Neither of them spoke, because whatever had whispered in the trees, Sophia had answered it, and she wasn't afraid. Morning arrived with no warmth. The fog remained thick and suffocating. The air felt heavier, pressing against their skin like unseen hands. Alex hadn't slept. Neither had Ryan. Sophia acted like nothing had happened. She stretched, yawned, and smiled at Claire, as if last night's whispering exchange had never occurred. But Alex knew she wasn't the same, and he wasn't the only one who noticed. Mark strapped on his backpack, rubbing his temples. "We need to move. Sitting here won't do us any good." Ethan stood. "We head back the way we came. Follow the trail." Ryan scoffed. You really think the trail is still there? Mark shot him a glare. We won't know until we check. The group backed up and started walking, following their footprints from the night before. But the deeper they moved into the fog, the less sense the forest made. The trail should have been clear. They had followed it in, so logically, following it back should be simple. Except it wasn't there. Their old footprints had vanished. The trees seemed different, unfamiliar, as if they had shifted during the night. Mark checked the map. His hands were shaking. This doesn't make sense. Claire's breathing quickened. Are we lost? Ethan turned in a slow circle, his face pale. No, something is changing things. Ryan kicked at the dirt, frustration boiling over. No way. We're not playing this horror movie bullshit. The trail is here somewhere. We just have to. He stopped mid-sentence, staring straight ahead at something impossible. A clearing, not just any clearing. Their campsite, the fire pit, the logs they sat on last night, their footprints circling the area. They had been walking in a straight line, and yet they had ended up right back where they started. Claire let out a sharp breath. No, we were going the right way. Mark shook his head. No, we weren't. The forest, it won't let us leave. Ethan's voice was hoarse. We're trapped. A heavy silence fell over them. Then, Sophia laughed. Soft, almost amused. Everyone turned to her. She sat on a log, tying her boot, a slight smile playing on her lips. Looks like we're staying then. Alex's blood ran cold because she wasn't surprised. She already knew. No one spoke for a long time. The realization sat heavy in their chests. The forest wouldn't let them leave. Mark rubbed his face. Okay. Let's not panic. Ryan let out a bitter laugh. Not panic. We walked in a straight damn line and now we're right back where we started. Claire pulled her jacket tighter around herself. Maybe we should just try again. Maybe we made a mistake. Alex wasn't listening. His gaze was locked on Sophia. She sat on the log, her fingers lazily tracing a shape in the dirt. A spiral, over and over, the same exact pattern. And when she looked up, she smirked at him, like she knew something he didn't. Alex's stomach twisted. That wasn't Sophia. Not anymore. They tried to leave again, and again, and again. Every time they ended up right back at the campsite. Hours passed. The sky remained a dull, lifeless gray. The fog thickened. Their hope thinned. Then Ethan swore under his breath. Guys, look at your arms. Alex frowned, rolling up his sleeve, and felt his heart stop. On his forearm, just below the skin, was a faint black mark, a twisted spiral, exactly like the one Sophia had been drawing in the dirt. His breath came fast. He looked at the others. They all had it. Faint at first, but undeniably there. Mark ran a trembling hand over his. What the hell is this? Claire's voice cracked. We didn't have these before, right? Ryan gritted his teeth. I don't like this. Ethan tried to scrub his off, but it wouldn't fade. It's under the damn skin. Alex turned sharply to Sophia. She didn't have one. She just watched them with too much interest, like she had been waiting for this. Alex stepped toward her, his voice low. You knew this would happen. Sophia tilted her head, smiling. Maybe, she said softly. Ryan grabbed his knife. You think this is funny? Sophia met his glare. I think it's inevitable. Alex's skin crawled. She knew something. And whatever the spirals meant, they weren't just marks. They were changing them. No one spoke after that. They sat around the fire, each staring at the dark spirals on their arms. They weren't just marks. They felt wrong, like something was curling beneath the skin, just beneath the surface. Ryan clenched his jaw. I don't care what these are. Tomorrow we break in a different direction. We keep moving until we find a way out. Mark nodded. Agreed. We can't stay here. Ethan stared at his spiral. His fingers traced it absent-mindedly. It's getting darker. Alex looked down. So was his. The spirals weren't fading. They were spreading. That night, Alex took the first shift. Sophia was the last to fall asleep. She stretched out lazily near the fire, sighing. Try not to be so tense, Alex. You'll need your energy. Alex ignored her. His grip tightened, but as the hours stretched on, exhaustion weighed heavy on his body. The fire flickered lower. His vision blurred at the edges. Just a few seconds of rest. Just a sound. Wet. Crunching. Alex's eyes snapped open, and Ethan wasn't in his sleeping bag. Alex shot to his feet, heart hammering. He scanned the area, but the fog was thicker now, swirling around them like smoke. Something moved beyond the firelight. Slow, deliberate steps. A low shuffling. Then, a shadow. Not standing. Crawling. Ethan, Alex whispered. No answer. Just that same wet crunching. Then Ethan lurched into the light. Alex staggered back, a cold chill stabbing through his chest. Ethan was on all fours, his fingers buried in the dirt, digging furiously. The veins in his arms bulged as he clawed at the earth, breathing ragged, his eyes wide and unblinking. Ethan, Alex hissed. Ethan froze. Then, very slowly, he turned his head. Alex's stomach dropped. His eyes were black, mouth slightly open, lips cracked and dry. Then, in a voice that was not his, Ethan whispered, "It's under us." A long pause. Then his body seized. He convulsed violently, his fingers clawing at his own arms, at the spirals that had spread up to his shoulders. The others woke up to the sound of his strangled screams. Claire scrambled toward him. "Ethan, Ethan's body jerked. His mouth opened wide in a silent scream. Then he collapsed, still, breathing, but barely. The group hovered around him in shock. Ryan's voice was shaky. What the hell just happened? Mark swallowed hard. The marks, they're changing us. Alex barely heard them. He was staring at Sophia. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't afraid. She was smiling, like this was exactly what she had been waiting for. Ethan didn't wake up for hours. He lay motionless, skin pale, lips trembling. The black spirals on his arms had spread, curling up his shoulders and toward his neck. Mark crouched beside him, pressing a hand to his forehead. "He's burning up." Claire's voice shook. "We need to find help." Ryan scoffed. "Yeah, and where exactly do we find that?" No one answered, because the truth was settling in. There was no help coming. No roads, no trails, no escape. They were alone, except Alex's gut twisted. They weren't. Ethan stirred, his breath hitched, eyes fluttering open, and for a moment, they were black, not just his pupils, all of it. Then, just as fast, they returned to normal. He blinked, groggy. "What happened?" Claire squeezed his hand. "You scared the hell out of us." Mark exhaled. "You had some kind of seizure." Ethan rubbed his arms, wincing. "I feel like something is crawling under my skin." Ryan muttered, "Yeah, no kidding." Then Ethan froze. His fingers dug into the dirt. His eyes widened. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. The group exchanged wary glances. Alex's blood ran cold. "Hear what?" Ethan slowly turned his head toward him. "The voices," he murmured. A heavy silence. Claire licked her lips. "Ethan, there's no one below us." Ethan's hands trembled as he gripped the ground. "They're whispering beneath us, under the dirt." A sickening dread settled over Alex. Ryan shook his head. "Ethan, man, you need to rest." Ethan's breath hitched. Then, in a shaking voice, he whispered, "They know our names." A long pause. No one moved. Then Ethan dug his fingers deeper into the soil. "They're right there," he rasped. "So close." His breathing grew heavier. His body tensed. And then he started digging, not in a frantic, desperate way, but slow, purposeful, like something was telling him to. The fire crackled. Mark grabbed his wrist. "Ethan, stop." Ethan yanked his arm away violently. "I have to find them." Alex grabbed him next. "Ethan, nothing is there." Ethan's face twisted in frustration. "You're not listening. They're talking to me. Then he stopped. His breath hitched, his body stiffened, and he stared down at his own shaking hands, like he finally realized what he was doing. Slowly, he looked up, his face ashen. "They're in my head," he whispered. A deep, suffocating silence settled over the group. Then Sophia sighed, stretching her arms. Well, she murmured, that didn't take long. Alex's stomach dropped. She had been waiting for this. And now, it had begun. Ethan sat motionless. His fingers twitched, still half buried in the dirt. His breathing was slow, uneven. The group watched him in uneasy silence. Then Ryan cleared his throat. Okay, we are officially in what the hell territory. Claire's voice was shaky. Ethan, the voices, are they still there? Ethan licked his lips, then, very softly, yes. Alex shivered. What are they saying? Ethan's hands clenched into fists. They're calling me. Ryan took a step back. Yeah, no, I don't like that. But Ethan wasn't done. He turned his head, locking eyes with Alex, and in a voice that wasn't entirely his own, he whispered, they want us to dig. No one spoke for a long time. The fire crackled, the mist curled around them, and Ethan wouldn't stop staring at the ground. Mark exhaled. All right, new plan. We don't listen to the creepy voices. We do not dig. No one spoke for a long time. The fire crackled, the mist curled around them, and Ethan wouldn't stop staring at the ground. Mark exhaled. All right, new plan. We don't listen to the creepy voices. We do not dig, and we focus on getting out of here. Sophia hummed, tilting her head. What if digging is the only way out? Alex's stomach twisted. Why would you say that? Sophia smiled. Because you don't know what's down there. Ryan scoffed. Yeah, and I'd like to keep it that way. But Ethan wasn't listening. He was still staring at the dirt, sweating, trembling. Then, very, very slowly, he started digging again. Mark lunged forward. Ethan! Ethan snarled, jerking away violently. Don't touch me. The group froze. That wasn't Ethan's voice. It was deeper, rougher, like something else had spoken through him. For a long moment, he just stood there, shoulders rising and falling. Then his body relaxed, and he looked down at his hands. They were bleeding. Dirt and blood mixed beneath his fingernails. His breath shook. I didn't mean to. Then, very softly, the ground shifted, a faint, unnatural shudder, like something beneath them had just moved. Claire whimpered. Did anyone else feel that? Ryan whispered, oh, hell no. Alex grabbed Ethan's wrist. We're done here, you hear me? No more digging, no more listening. We walk. We don't stop. We don't look back. Ethan swallowed. He nodded, and for a moment, just a moment, Alex thought they might be okay. Then Sophia sighed dramatically, rolling her shoulders. If you say so. Alex turned to her, jaw clenched. I mean it. Sophia's smile widened. Of course, Alex, she murmured. You're in charge. But as she turned away, something flickered in her eyes. Something amused, like she already knew the truth, like she knew. They would dig, whether they wanted to or not. They left the clearing. No one argued. They just moved, pushing through the fog, stepping over twisted roots, keeping their eyes straight ahead. No one mentioned the voices. No one mentioned the way the ground had shifted. But Alex knew they had all felt it. Something beneath them had moved, and it was waiting. They walked for hours, or maybe it was minutes. Time felt strange in the mist, stretching and folding in on itself, making every step feel heavier than the last. Ethan was quiet, too quiet. His usual sarcastic remarks were gone, replaced by staring. He kept glancing at the ground. His hands twitched like he was fighting the urge to dig. Alex kept close to him, watching. He wasn't sure what he was watching for. Then Ethan stumbled. Mark caught him. "Whoa, Ethan!" Ethan groaned, clutching his arms. His spirals had darkened, no longer faint under the skin. Now they were raised, like burned scars. Ryan cursed under his breath. "This is getting worse." Ethan's breathing quickened. "Something's happening to me." Then his body locked up. A horrible choking sound escaped his throat. Then his nails started to break, one by one, splitting down the middle, peeling away from his fingertips like dead leaves. He let out a strangled scream, falling to his knees. Claire lunged toward him. "Ethan!" His veins were black, twisting beneath his skin, spreading out from the spirals, curling up his neck. His back arched, his fingers twitched, and then his hands dug into the dirt, uncontrollably, like something inside him was forcing him to. He gasped, struggling to stop himself. But his hands kept digging. Claire grabbed his wrists. "Ethan, stop." His nails were gone. His fingertips were bleeding, his breath coming in sharp, desperate gasps. But his body wouldn't stop. Dirt flew. Fingers tore into the earth, deeper, deeper. And then the ground pulsed. A slow, deliberate shudder, like a heartbeat. Ethan jerked back, eyes wild. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Sophia crouched beside him and smiled. "You almost reached them," she whispered. Alex felt his stomach turn, because she sounded so pleased, like this was meant to happen. And suddenly, Alex wasn't sure if Ethan was still Ethan, or if something else was taking his place. Ethan sat in the dirt, trembling. His hands were a mess of blood and dirt, his fingers twitching like they still wanted to dig. Mark kept a hand on his shoulder, trying to keep him still. "Just breathe, man." Ethan's breaths were shallow, panicked, but Alex wasn't looking at him anymore. He was looking at Sophia, the way she crouched near Ethan, smiling, watching, like she was waiting for something. "You knew this would happen," Alex said. Sophia hummed, tilting her head. "I knew it was inevitable." Ryan scowled. "What the hell does that mean?" Sophia ran a lazy finger through the dirt. Then she grinned. "It means," she murmured, "he's not the first." A heavy silence. Claire whispered, "What do you mean?" "Not the first." Sophia stood, stretching. She gestured at Ethan's shaking form. "This isn't new. It's happened before." Alex's blood ran cold. "To who?" Sophia's smile widened. She turned her gaze to the trees and whispered, "Them." The fog shifted. Ryan tensed. "Who's them?" Sophia turned back to them, eyes glinting. "The ones who came before us." Ethan shuddered. I don't understand." Sophia crouched beside him again, lowering her voice. "You hear them, don't you?" she whispered. Ethan's breath hitched. His lips parted, eyes darting back and forth like he was listening. Ryan swore under his breath, "Sophia, stop messing with him." But Sophia wasn't messing with him. Ethan's expression changed from fear to something else, something distant. His gaze flicked up, not at Sophia, not at Alex, at the trees. His voice was barely a whisper. "They're watching." A snap echoed in the distance. Mark shot to his feet. What was that? The group went still. The fire crackled softly. The fog swirled. Then another sound. A slow, deliberate step. Ryan clenched his fists. "There's someone out there," Sophia chuckled. "I told you." Alex's pulse hammered. They weren't alone. And then they saw it. A figure, standing at the edge of the fog, unmoving, too still. Then another, and another. Silhouettes, just standing there, watching. Then Ethan gasped. Alex turned to him, and his heart stopped, because Ethan's eyes were black again, and in a voice that wasn't quite his own, he whispered, "They were just like us." No one moved. The figure stood at the edge of the fog, barely visible through the swirling mist, unmoving, watching. Ethan's voice was hollow. "They were just like us." Alex's blood ran cold. "Who are they?" Ethan blinked slowly. Then his lips curled into a small, eerie smile. "The ones who never left." Ryan grabbed Alex's arm, voice tight. "We need to move, now." But the figures moved first. A slow, synchronized step forward, emerging from the fog, and Alex's stomach dropped. They were wrong. Too tall, too thin. Their skin was stretched tight over their bones, black spirals carved into their flesh. But their faces, hollow, as if their features had been erased. No eyes, no mouths, just smooth, empty skin. A sickening realization clawed at Alex's mind. They weren't people anymore. They were something else. Sophia exhaled dreamily. "Aren't they beautiful?" Ryan turned on her, eyes wild. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Sophia grinned. "You still don't get it, do you?" she murmured. Mark stepped in front of Claire, pushing her behind him. "Sophia, if you know what's happening, You need to tell us, Sophia laughed. Oh, Mark, it's not about knowing. She tilted her head. It's about accepting. The hollow ones stepped closer, and for the first time, Alex heard it. A whisper, soft, twisting through the trees, calling to them, and he realized it wasn't coming from the figures. It was coming from below. His breath hitched the ground beneath. His feet felt thinner, like something was beneath them, something waiting. Then Ethan let out a small, shaky laugh and whispered, I can hear them clearer now. Ethan's voice was strange, soft, almost reverent, like the whispers had become something comforting, something he wanted to listen to. Alex grabbed his shoulders. Ethan, focus. Ethan laughed, but it wasn't his laugh. It was wrong. It echoed like more than one voice was speaking at once, like something inside him was laughing too. Then the hollow ones stepped forward again, and Alex realized they weren't walking, they were gliding. Their movements were unnatural, bodies tilting at angles that shouldn't be possible. Ryan cursed, we need to run, but Ethan didn't move. He just stood there, smiling, and whispered, why run? They just want us to listen. Mark grabbed him. Snap out of it, he hissed. But Ethan just grinned, like Mark was the one who didn't understand, like he had already given in. And then the ground pulsed. Sickening, heavy thud beneath their feet, like a heartbeat. The hollow ones stopped, and in the silence, something changed. Claire gasped. Alex turned, and his stomach dropped. Ethan's spirals were moving, shifting, spreading. The black lines curled higher, up his neck, twisting toward his jaw, like something beneath his skin was growing, like it was trying to reach his face. Ryan staggered back. Oh, hell no. Ethan giggled. The sound wasn't human. And then he whispered something so softly, so gently, that Alex barely heard it. I think I know what they are. Mark clenched his fists. Ethan's blackened veins pulsed. And then he turned his head, looking straight at the hollow. Once, his smile widened, and in a voice not entirely his own, he whispered, they're what's left after the marks take over. The hollow ones didn't move. They just stood there, watching, waiting, and Ethan just smiled. His spirals had reached his jaw, dark, twisting lines curling under his skin, like roots, like they were taking hold. Ryan's voice was sharp. We need to leave, now. But Ethan laughed, and for the first time, his voice echoed, like something else was laughing with him. Mark clenched his fists. Ethan tilted his head, and in a voice not entirely his own, he whispered, why? There's nowhere to go. The group moved anyway. Ryan and Mark hauled Ethan up, forcing him forward. Claire was shaking. His veins, his eyes, Alex swallowed hard. We'll figure it out. But he didn't believe it, because Ethan wasn't fighting them. He wasn't resisting. He was just smiling, like he knew something they didn't. They walked fast. The hollow ones didn't follow, but Alex could feel them, watching, waiting. He didn't look back. He didn't dare. Then, a sound, a soft, distant humming, low, twisting through the trees. Claire's breath hitched. Do you hear that? Ryan's jaw tightened. Yeah. Mark exhaled. It's coming from then. Ethan stopped. The group froze. Ethan's body locked up, his head snapping to the side, like he was listening, like something had called his name. Then, very softly, he whispered, "They're not the worst thing here." Alex's stomach turned. What? Ethan's eyes darkened. Not just his pupils, all of it, like his soul was sinking. Then, another pulse, deeper this time, like something beneath the ground had just shifted. And for the first time, the hollow ones reacted. They didn't move, but their heads snapped up, like they had felt it too. And for the first time, Alex thought they looked afraid. Ethan giggled softly. You feel it, don't you? Ryan's pulse hammered. What the hell is under us? Ethan's grin widened. The beginning. Then, the ground cracked and everything went wrong. The crack in the ground widened. A deep, jagged split beneath their feet. The hollow ones didn't move, but their heads tilted, like they were listening, like they could hear something rising. Then, Ethan gasped, his entire body convulsed. Mark grabbed him. Ethan. Ethan's eyes rolled back, his veins darkened. And then, he whispered something, so softly, so horribly quiet. It's waking up. Then the ground dropped. Not all of it, just beneath Ethan. His body collapsed, his limbs twisting unnaturally. The spirals on his skin pulsed. And then, a black hand burst from the ground. Long, twisted, too many fingers, grabbing Ethan's arm. Claire screamed. Ryan lunged forward. Get him out. Mark and Alex hauled Ethan back. The black hand clawed at his skin, but it wasn't hurting him. It was dragging him down, like it was trying to pull him underground. Alex's breath hitched beneath the cracked earth. There was movement. Something huge, shifting, crawling. The ground was breathing. Then, a voice, not from Ethan, not from the hollow ones, from beneath them, slow, ancient, and starving. You are almost ready. The hand tightened. Ethan screamed. His spirals burned. Then, a horrible tearing sound, like flesh ripping apart. Ethan's marks split open, and something inside him, something black and writhing, moved, like something had been planted in him, and it was trying to get out, Mark yanked him back. The hand slipped away. The crack in the ground sealed itself. Just like that. Like nothing had happened. But something had. Ethan gasped for air, his body shaking, his spirals still moving. Ryan cursed. What the hell was that? Ethan laughed, soft, unsteady, and in a voice not entirely his own, he whispered, I think I know what the spirals mean now. Alex's stomach twisted. What? Ethan lifted his trembling hands and smiled. Their roots. Then his veins turned black and the ground shuddered again, like whatever was down there wasn't done with him yet. Ethan sat in the dirt, shaking. His veins were black, not just dark, black, like something inside him was spreading, like it was changing him. Ryan stepped forward. Ethan, what do you mean? Their roots. Ethan laughed softly. His fingers curled into the dirt, like he was feeling something they couldn't. Then, very quietly, he whispered, we were never supposed to leave. Alex's pulse hammered. What? Ethan's breath hitched. His spirals moved again, slow, creeping up his neck. Then he giggled. The ground breathes, the roots grow. Ryan clenched his fists. Ethan turned to them, smiling. And we become part of it. A sickening silence. Then Mark's voice, sharp, terrified. What the hell are you saying? Ethan hummed. We weren't lost. We were planted. Claire covered her mouth. Ryan took a step back. No, that's insane. Ethan just smiled, but his hands, his fingernails were black now, like the veins had reached them, like the change was spreading. Alex's stomach twisted. How do we stop it? Ethan's smile flickered. For the first time, fear crossed his face. Then he laughed, but it sounded wrong. Not because he thought it was funny, because he knew the truth, and the truth was worse. Then, so softly it was almost a breath, he whispered, You don't. The moment Ethan whispered, You don't, something in the air shifted. The fog felt heavier. The ground felt thinner, like something beneath them was listening, like it was waiting. Mark grabbed Ethan by the shoulders. No, we're not just letting this happen. Ethan smiled, but his eyes weren't right. Black veins curling toward his irises. His pupils were too wide, like he was fading. Ryan exhaled sharply. We need to move. We need to. Then, the trees shifted. Not the fog, not the ground. The trees themselves. Branches twisted. Roots rose from the dirt, like the entire forest was alive, and it did not want them to leave. Claire grabbed Alex's arm. Did you see that? Alex's throat went dry. Yeah, he saw it. Ryan swore under his breath. This is bad. This is really bad. Ethan tilted his head, like he wasn't afraid at all, like he knew. Then, in a soft, almost dreamy voice. He whispered, "It doesn't like when we fight it." And then the ground split open. A deep, jagged crack tore through the dirt. The sound was sickening, like something beneath them was ripping apart. Ryan stumbled back. "Go, move." But the roots shot up, not branches. Hands. Dark, twisted limbs clawing from the earth, reaching for their legs. Mark hauled Ethan up. Alex grabbed Claire, shoving her forward. But the forest, it was closing in. The trees moved. Branches grasped. The ground opened wider, and from deep, deep below, something whispered. Something laughed. Then, a new sound. A heartbeat. Not theirs. The forest's. Slow, deep, like something massive was waking up. And Ethan just smiled. It's almost ready. The heartbeat pulsed through the ground. Slow, heavy, like something massive was waking beneath them. The forest was moving. Roots slithered across the dirt. Branches stretched toward them. And the fog was thickening. Claire's breath hitched. The trees, they're moving. Ryan grabbed her wrist, yanking her forward. "I know." Mark hauled Ethan along, but Ethan didn't fight. He just walked, calm, steady, like he already knew how this ended, like he had already given up. Alex's pulse pounded. "We have to get out of here." Ryan gritted his teeth. "No shit, but how?" The path was gone. The trees had closed around them. The fog was blinding. And Ethan was changing. His veins were black. His fingernails darkened. And when he lifted his head, his pupils had stretched. Not round anymore. Slitted. Like the hollow ones. Like he was becoming one of them. Mark's grip tightened. "We're not losing you." Ethan smiled, but his lips were splitting, his skin cracking, like something beneath was pushing through. And when he spoke, his voice wasn't just his own. It was layered, like something else was speaking with him. Then, so softly, he whispered, "You don't get it, do you?" Alex's breath caught. Ethan's blackened fingers twitched. "There is no out." Then, the ground collapsed. A massive hole opened beneath them. Not a crack, a pit, dark, endless. Ryan lunged for Claire. Alex grabbed Mark. But Ethan didn't fight it. He just smiled and whispered, "It's time." Then he let go and fell into the dark. Ethan fell, straight into the black. Mark lunged after him. "Ethan!" But he was gone, swallowed by the pit. Claire screamed, "What do we do?" Alex's stomach twisted. They couldn't just leave him. Even if Ethan wasn't Ethan anymore. Ryan cursed. "We go after him." Mark's jaw clenched. "That's suicide." Ryan's voice was cold, hard. "Leaving him is worse." Then the ground trembled and the forest whispered. Not words. Something deeper, hungrier. The fog curled around their skin, like fingers, like it was pushing them forward. And in the pit below, a voice laughed, Ethan's voice. but not just his, and very softly. It whispered, "Come see." Ryan jumped first. Alex's breath caught. "Ryan!" But Ryan was already falling. Mark swore. "This is insane." Claire shook her head. "We can't leave them." And then, one by one, they jumped into the dark. The fall lasted forever. There was no bottom, no light, just cold air rushing past them. Claire screamed. Mark swore. And then the dark swallowed them whole. They hit the ground. Hard. The impact stole Alex's breath. But it wasn't rock beneath him. It wasn't dirt. It was soft, like flesh, like they had landed on something alive. Claire gasped. "Where are we?" Alex looked up, and his stomach dropped. The walls weren't stone. They were veins. Black, pulsing, alive, like the entire cavern was a beating heart. And in the center, standing perfectly still, was Ethan, smiling, waiting. And when he spoke, his voice was layered. Something else was speaking with him, and it whispered, "Welcome home." Ethan stood in the center of the living cavern, his veins black, his eyes unnatural, and the walls, they weren't just pulsing, they were breathing. The entire place was alive. Mark took a step back. "What the hell is this?" Ethan tilted his head. "You already know." Ryan's fists clenched. "No, we don't." Ethan's smile widened. His teeth, they were too sharp now, like they had been reshaped, like his body wasn't his anymore. He lifted his arms, and the walls reacted. Veins crawled toward him, like he was part of them, like they were part of him. Then his voice layered again, and he whispered. It was never a forest. Alex's breath hitched. "What?" Ethan giggled softly. "You thought we were in a forest, but forests don't breathe." Claire's stomach dropped. The ground beneath them shifted, and suddenly they understood. This wasn't just underground. It wasn't a cave. It wasn't earth, the walls, the roots, the fog, everything. It was part of something living, something that had been waiting, something that had been growing. Ryan's voice was low, shaken. "Then what the hell is it?" Ethan sighed, like he was disappointed, like they should have figured it out. Then, very softly, he whispered, "A womb." Claire stumbled back. No, that's..." Ethan's blackened fingers curled, and the walls reacted. The veins thickened. The heartbeat deepened, like something inside this place was ready to be born. And Ethan, he was just smiling. "And I am almost done growing." Ethan breathed in, and the walls breathed with him. The pulsing veins stretched. The ground beneath them shifted. Something deep below rumbled, like a heartbeat, like something massive was stirring. Mark's voice shook. "Ethan, stop." Ethan smiled, but it wasn't just his smile. It was the walls, the veins twisting into a grin, like the entire place was smiling with him. Then, his blackened fingers twitched, and the cavern reacted. Alex's breath caught, because for the first time, he saw what was growing. Not just Ethan, not just the walls, everywhere. The spirals, twisting in the flesh, carved into the pulsing veins. Not marks, not roots, eggs, and inside them, something moved. Claire gagged. No, no, no. Ethan giggled. They're almost ready. Ryan's stomach dropped. The hollow ones. Ethan smiled wider. They were just the first. Alex's balls pounded. Because the truth was worse. This wasn't just a womb. This wasn't just a birth. This was a hatching. And Ethan was the final piece. Mark's hands shook. He looked at Ryan, looked at Alex, and whispered, "We have to stop him." Ryan's breath was shaky, because they all knew what he meant. And Ethan just smiled. "You won't." Then the spirals cracked open, and the first hollow thing began to crawl out. The first egg cracked open. Something crawled out. Long, brittle limbs. Skin pale as bone. Eyes. No eyes. Just a mouth. A wide, grinning mouth. And it turned toward them. Ryan froze. Because it looked like Ethan. A twisted, hollow version of him. Mark's breath hitched. The eggs. Ryan's voice was hoarse. They're all Ethan. Not just his. Copies. Hundreds of them. Waiting to hatch. Waiting to be born. And Ethan just watched. We're almost done. Alex's hands shook. He turned to Ryan. Mark. Claire. They all knew. They all saw it. There was only one way. Kill Ethan. Kill the seed. Before it was too late. Ryan pulled out his knife. Mark clenched his fists. Alex swallowed hard. And Claire's eyes burned with tears. "Ethan," she whispered, "please." Ethan just tilted his head, smiling. "It's okay." Ryan lunged. The cavern exploded. The walls screamed. Not voices. The whole place. The fog thickened. The ground split. And the roots came alive. Because the forest would not let them kill him. Not now. Not when he was so close. The hollow things screeched. They lunged. Mark swung at them. Alex shoved Claire back. Ryan pushed forward. But the roots grabbed him, twisting, squeezing. And Ethan just watched, waiting, because he knew they were too late. And the hollow ones were finally waking up. The cavern shook. The walls screamed. Not voices. The entire place. A deep, horrible wailing. Like a mother in pain. Like something dying. Or something being born. The hollow things moved in. Crawling from their eggs. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Each one a twisted version of Ethan. Mark swung his knife. It slashed through one's neck. But no blood. No bones. Just emptiness. like the body was only a shell. The hollow thing laughed, then kept coming. Alex grabbed Claire. "We have to move." Ryan ripped free from the roots, his face twisted with pain. He turned to Ethan. Ethan, who was watching everything, waiting. Ryan gritted his teeth. "Kill him. Now." Mark lunged, his knife aimed for Ethan's chest, but the roots reacted. They shot up, wrapped around Mark's wrist, held him in place. The forest fought back, protecting Ethan, because Ethan was part of it now. More than just a person, more than just a body. He was the final piece, the last part of the Hollow One's birth. And his voice, it was layered now, not just his, something deeper, something ancient. He tilted his head and whispered, "It's done." Then the eggs shattered. The Hollow Ones crawled out, skin pale as bone, mouths grinning wide, eyes. No eyes, because they didn't need them. They saw through the fog, through the forest itself, because they were the forest. And Ethan was one of them now. Ryan struggled. The roots had him pinned. Mark fought, slashing with his knife. But the Hollow Ones didn't bleed, didn't feel pain. Claire clung to Alex, her breath ragged. "We're gonna die here." Alex's pulse pounded. Not yet. Not yet. They still had a chance, but only one. Ethan. Alex's eyes locked on him. Ethan stood still, smiling, waiting, like he already knew how this ended. Alex's hands shook, because if they couldn't kill Ethan, maybe they could take him back, force him to remember who he was, if he was still in there at all. Because if he wasn't, none of them were getting out of here alive. Ryan caught his look. "That's a long shot." Mark's voice was grim. "It's the only shot." Claire gripped Alex's arm, her voice barely a whisper. "How do we bring him back?" Alex swallowed hard. Then he took a step toward Ethan. The Hollow Ones reacted. They turned toward him, their mouths opening. Wide. Too wide. A scream building. But Alex kept walking, his hands shaking, his voice low, steady. "Ethan." Ethan's blackened fingers twitched. Alex stepped closer. "You don't have to do this." Ethan's head tilted, like he was listening, like something inside him was still there. Alex's heart pounded. "Come back." For a moment, a flicker, a hesitation. Then Ethan's voice, soft, almost his own. "I can't." And the Hollow Ones lunged. The Hollow Ones lunged, their mouths opened wide, not to bite, to consume, to pull Alex into them, into the nothingness inside. Ryan shoved forward, slashing his knife. Mark tore free from the roots. Claire screamed, but Alex didn't move. He just stared at Ethan, because Ethan had hesitated. "Ethan," Alex gasped. The Hollow Ones froze, just for a second. A flicker of doubt. Alex stepped forward, his hands shaking, his voice raw. "This isn't you." Ethan's smile twitched, his blackened fingers curled. like something inside him was fighting, like he wasn't fully gone. Not yet. Ryan's voice was sharp. Alex, move. The hollow ones shifted, their faces contorted. They were angry now, because Alex was breaking something, disrupting something ancient. The birth wasn't complete, and Ethan was the key. If he broke free, it would all collapse. Alex's breath was shaky. He took one more step. The hollow ones hissed. The cavern shook, but Alex ignored them. He looked straight into Ethan's black eyes and whispered, "You don't belong to them." Ethan flinched like a crack in glass, a break in the spiral, and then the forest screamed. The roots lashed out. The hollow ones shrieked. Everything started to collapse because Ethan had stopped smiling. His face twisted like something was tearing inside him, like something was ripping apart. And when he looked at Alex, his voice was small, shaky. "Alex." Then the cavern began to fall. The cavern cracked. Veins ripped open. The walls screamed. The hollow ones lurched, their mouths twisted, because something was wrong. The birth, it was breaking. Ethan staggered, his breath ragged, his eyes flickering between black and normal, between Ethan and something else. Mark grabbed Ryan. "We have to go." But Alex didn't move. Not yet. Because Ethan was fighting. And if they left him, if they ran now, they'd lose him forever. "Come on, Ethan," Alex shouted. The hollow ones screeched. The forest howled, trying to hold him, trying to keep him, because he was the last piece, the final seed. If he broke, everything broke. Ethan clutched his head. His fingers trembled. The black veins crawled up his arms, like the hollow ones were pulling him back, like they wouldn't let him go. Claire grabbed Alex. "We have to run." Alex's chest ached, but he made a choice. Alex lunged forward, grabbed Ethan's shoulders, his voice raw. "You are not one of them." Ethan gasped. His eyes, for the first time, cleared, and suddenly, the hollow ones screamed. The forest convulsed. The cavern collapsed, because Ethan was no longer theirs. The walls crumbled. The fog exploded, and the hollow ones shattered. Their bodies unraveled, turning to nothing, because without Ethan, they could not exist. Ryan ripped free. Mark grabbed Claire, and Alex pulled Ethan with him. They ran as the world died, as the hollow ones vanished, as the forest collapsed, until light, real light, blinding, painful, and then air, cold, sharp, and the smell of pine, real pine. The group collapsed, gasping, trembling, and when Alex looked up, the forest was gone. The hollow ones were gone, and beside him, Ethan was crying, alive, human again, and the nightmare was over. Weeks passed. The town searched for them, but the hollow ones were never found. No signs, no evidence, like they never existed. But Alex knew they weren't gone. Not really, because some nights, in the deepest fog, he could still hear the whispers, and he knew the hollow ones were waiting for the next lost soul, for the next Ethan, for the next time the world forgot, and the hollow ones could rise again. The end. And the hollow ones could rise again. The end.